better understand our world, ourselves, and our future, this program is made possible by the people of Chevron. Chevron, giving thought to television.
The Namib Desert is one of the oldest and driest deserts in the world. Temperatures may soar over 100 degrees, and the wind blows for weeks on end. For every living creature, it is a struggle merely to survive here. Yet life has adapted to this ocean of sand. It takes myriad forms, beautiful, surprising, and strange. Here, solitary hyenas patrol the barren dunes, and lions roam even to the ocean's edge, along the legendary Skeleton Coast. Strangest of all, and recorded on rock engravings perhaps thousands of years ago, elephants live here. Until recently, their mere existence in the desert seemed little more than fanciful legend. In 1984, Des and Jen Bartlett came here to photograph the desert wildlife. They had braved almost every natural environment on Earth, but never had they found one so beautiful and so difficult. Challenged by this enormous wilderness, the Bartletts took to the sky. They soared in the desert wind like hawks or eagles, seeking out the creatures of the Namib. The rare and elusive elephants lured them on, and one day at a remote waterhole, the desert elephants appeared out of nowhere. This is their story, the survivors of the Skeleton Coast. For hundreds of miles, the Skeleton Coast stretches along the southwestern shore of Africa. The cold Benguela Current sweeps out of Antarctica and wells up here, bringing rich nutrients to this lonely coast. On the edge of the sea, life is varied and abundant. Thick fog, terrible winds, and treacherous currents have driven mariners onto this coast for centuries. This place is a vast graveyard of ships. The beach is littered with the wreckage of dreams. This place is called the Skeleton Coast, in part because of the bones of ships, and in part because of human bones found here and inland, sailors who escaped from the sea only to perish more horribly in the vast desert beyond. The Skeleton Coast is part of the Atlantic shore of Namibia in southwestern Africa. It is one of the rare places where a vast, barren desert meets the sea. A portion of the coast has been established as the Skeleton Coast Park, a protected area 300 miles long, but only 25 miles wide. The remorseless wind is constantly moving and reshaping this eerie landscape. The sand itself seems alive. To escape predators, the searing heat, and bitter cold at night, many creatures here live as much beneath the sand as on it. In this bizarre place, the weight of a passing lizard may trigger a barrage of strange sounds. No one can fully explain the so-called roaring dunes that hum and drone whenever sand slides down them. Sometimes they can be heard for miles. For a few hardy souls, the Skeleton Coast is home. Des and Jen Bartlett feel closer to nature here than any place in the world. They have been here for 9 years and have learned to live in harmony with the Namib.
Not many marriages would survive if the man and the wife were spending 24 hours a day in their own company and going week on week, 2 or 3 months before they went out for supplies and met other people. So you must both have the same feeling, the same wonderment at nature and the area for it to work. And I think we both have the same feeling for it and the same determination or drive to find out what's happening and get it onto film or onto stills.
The lives of Des and Jen Bartlett have been like one long and glorious safari. Back in 1954, Des was invited to film wildlife in Africa for 6 months. He stayed 10 years. At his side, Jen combined her love of wildlife with her skill in photography, and the results delighted the world. Julie, the Bartlett's daughter, had animals for playmates as they roamed from Africa to the Arctic, from Suriname to Alaska. Secrets of nature were open to them. They were among the first human beings to make friends with a whale. In Canada, the Bartletts raised a flock of orphaned snow geese, and the geese were so tame they could be filmed close up in full flight, a highlight of their classic documentary on snow goose migration. After 32 years as nomads, the Bartletts thought they would stay on the Skeleton Coast just a short time. But the wildlife here was more elusive than they ever imagined, and soon they became fascinated by the desert elephants. Along the Skeleton Coast, several dry riverbeds reach from far inland to the sea. These natural highways are ages-old game trails, and it is here that the mysterious desert elephants are most often seen. Until recent years, little was known about these desert-dwelling giants. How did they survive here? How did they find enough water and food to sustain their huge appetites? It was presumed that the elephants had to occasionally cross the forbidding dunes that separate the riverbeds, a spectacle rarely seen and never captured on film. Scattered sparsely along the edges of the dunes are natural waterholes. At one of these, called Ausis, the Bartletts found deep furrows on a steep slip face. They were unmistakable proof that elephants had recently been here.
Gee whiz, look at them.
It's sure steep where they came down.
They'd look magnificent, but they probably do it only at night time. That's the trouble.
Well, we'd be lucky to ever see it.
To see elephants descend this slope and to capture the sight for others became a compelling dream for Des and Jen. In search of the rare desert wildlife, Des and Jen needed to master the huge distances of the Namib. Even a herd of elephants could easily vanish here. The first and greatest problem was how to find them. From a factory in Pennsylvania, they ordered 2 tiny airplanes. Des and Jen test flew them in the US, then had them carefully taken apart and packed, piece by piece. Only this way could they be sure everything they needed was there. A single missing bolt could mean weeks of delay. Like an oversized model kit, a plane took shape near the Bartlett's cabin at Merva Bay. The planes are called drifters. They're powered by a 46-horsepower 2-stroke engine, originally designed for a snowmobile. Des and Jen had learned to fly years ago, but when they took wing in the desert, the miracle of flight happened all over again. Soon after they assembled the first plane, the Bartletts saw elephants from the air. The herd was headed straight for the desert waterhole where the Bartletts had seen their tracks. It took more than an hour to land, get the camera gear together, and hurry to the waterhole.
We only had 2 oranges in the water from the drifter, and hoped that they'd still be there when we got there. So we drove past where we would normally stop and walk in, and went over onto the sand dunes and backpacked cameras half a mile to the dunes overlooking the waterhole.
They approached the waterhole from downwind.
Seems like they're there. Yeah, they're there.
The elephants are arriving. They are just in time.
Can I hold? I can manage it.
Among the elephants is a tiny calf. The herd cautiously approaches the water. Once thought to be only occasional visitors to the desert, these elephants now are known to be permanent desert dwellers. At one time, the population was 300 or more, but relentless poaching had reduced their numbers severely. Sure enough, 2 eager elephants slide down like playful children. The poachers had made the desert elephants skittish and shy, and the desert environment has forced them to be nomads, always moving on to find fresh food and water. They know exactly where they are going. They sometimes make a beeline from one oasis to the next, traversing 40 or 50 miles of barren desert. For the rest of the day, the herd feeds and frolics here, never realizing that the Bartletts are nearby. These are perhaps the world's tallest elephants. They have huge feet and very long legs, ideal for traveling far and fast across the sand. The elephants doze off and sleep, standing up.
The whole herd stayed all day long, and they had a tiny baby who was less than a week old, probably only a day or 2 old, and that was a great thrill. Then it kept hidden for most of the day, and then late in the day, around 5:30, 6:30, the matriarch led the herd out and headed right into the dune area, which we'd never expected to see, and we haven't seen it since. In 8.5 years, we've never seen those elephants cross that area.
Calves are guarded jealously, and they are scarce indeed. In one 5-year period, only 7 calves were born, and just 2 survived.
The bulls went up the slip face area, and it was late in the day, therefore their shadows came in backlighting down the dune, down the slip face, and it was a beautiful sight, and it was a highlight of our life in many ways, in that you can't plan these things, you can't set them up, you've just got to take advantage of when it happens and make the most of it. Just little dots in the distance now.
Where do you think they're going?
I guess it has to be Ganius, but that's another 50, 60 kilometres more. I've got a long walk tonight.
Yeah, a little baby with them too.
Yeah, probably his first trip like this.
Where the elephants were headed was impossible to know. If the Bartletts tried to follow, they would soon lose their way after dark. But rare and fleeting as these encounters were, they made Des and Jen determined to stay on, hoping to see and to learn more. Along the Skeleton Coast, the little moisture available usually comes in the form of fog. When warm air sweeps across the cold Benguela Current, fog may spread as far as 60 miles inland. A moist gray curtain descends over everything. Ever elusive, giraffes now appear like ghosts in the silent dawn. Many creatures have ingenious strategies for capturing the fog. This desert beetle climbs to the crest of a high dune and stands with its head downward. The fog condenses on the beetle's body and trickles down to its mouth. So it wins survival in this parched environment. The fog is the key to almost all life here. Spider webs are natural traps for moisture. Forming on tiny webs close to the ground, each droplet is a life-giving waterhole for thirsty ants. The fog spreads a clammy mist over everything and brings cold, cheerless mornings to Des and Jen's camp on the dunes. Although they have a cabin on the coast, they prefer to camp out in the desert. Almost 300 miles from the nearest town, they are alone for weeks at a time. In their 9 years here, the Bartletts have become well adapted to the desert, like the creatures they photograph. And one of them became their friend. They were given a young suricate, a kind of mongoose. They called him Suri. Suri was a hyperactive companion, always hungry and digging in search of food. A white lady spider is no match for Suri. Another spider makes a miraculous escape. Out of sight is out of mind. The tracks of a lion, one of a small population, a dozen or so, that inhabited the Skeleton Coast when the Bartletts first came here. They reveal that a large male passed their camp in the night. Once one came within 3 feet of their sleeping bag. In search of the lions, the Bartletts would check the beach near their cabin for tracks. The lions were attracted by carcasses washed up here, seals, seabirds, and even an occasional pilot whale. One of the most unusual sights the Bartletts have ever encountered. A lion feeds on a whale. Perhaps nowhere else in the world could this occur. Sometimes competing with jackals and other scavengers, these lions worked hard for a living. Their prey included ostrich, gemsbok, and giraffe they would find further inland. These desert lions were besieged, lonely fugitives trying to survive not only the harshness of the desert, but also the increasing encroachments of man. The Bartletts felt great sympathy for them. Even the king of beasts has to give way to an incoming tide. he vanished into the dunes. Des and Jen became experts at picking up the trail of the Skeleton Coast lions. A feather testifies to an ostrich kill, and drag marks point the way to a rocky ridge where the lion has taken the carcass. The Bartletts feared for the life of this magnificent male. It would be easy for him to roam too far and leave the protection of the park. Hoping to keep track of the few remaining lions in the park, a nature conservator will tranquilize this one and fit him with a radio collar. The collar contains a tiny radio transmitter so he can be located and tracked from a distance. When he awakens, the lion will be groggy, but none the worse for this strange experience. Soon after, the male was joined by a lioness, which also had been collared. It was hoped that they would mate and have cubs. Following their prey, the pair was tracked and seen from time to time, still together and apparently doing well. But outside the park boundaries, in the dry river valleys where the wild animals would naturally go, herdsmen eke out a living on this arid land. Their goats and cattle are easy prey for lions, and the people themselves and their children are vulnerable to attack, especially at night in their fragile shelters. When the lions were seen nearby, these people reacted predictably, and soon both the lions were dead. Des and Jen had known this lioness for more than 5 years, almost all her life. The male lion had been skinned and his hide hidden. Outside the park, killing him in defense of life and property is legal. Trading in wildlife trophies without a permit is not. To animal lovers, this life was precious. To native herdsmen, it was a threat. Whenever they are in close contact, a tragic outcome is often inevitable. Within a few years, all the lions of the Skeleton Coast were dead. No longer did the great cats roam the beaches. At home in Merva Bay, the Bartletts took the news hard.
The worst moment for us was when we heard that the lioness and the male lion had been shot. And suddenly to find that, boom, they're no longer there, they've been shot, was shattering to us. And another sad part of that was that the lioness was carrying 4 cubs that would have been born within a month. So we would have had a fantastic opportunity to film her with her youngsters. The big problem for the Skeleton Coast Park is it's too narrow a strip. It's not an environment in itself. The animals that are in it must go out of the protected area of the Skeleton Coast, and that's when they get killed. And so we'll just carry on, hopefully making people aware of it, trying to get funds to help conserve it. And the people here, the conservationists, are doing a wonderful job. But all they need is the money to help them.
The tragedy of the lions would haunt them for a long time. but it sealed the Bartlett's determination to help protect the wildlife that remains here. There was always a new adventure. Now, with a second plane, they could launch aerial expeditions into more remote parts of the Namib Desert. Des sometimes pushes the planes to the utmost, taking off with 250 pounds of gear. It takes a while to get off the ground.
Jen, in many ways, is more cautious than I am and more thorough in, say, the pre-flight inspections of the drifter, and the same with the flying. And she's more cautious and I'm more cowboy, as such, as she calls it. But it's a wonderful mix, because if I was as cautious as she was, we wouldn't get as much action and excitement in the flying or in the filming. And yet I might kill myself if I didn't have her as a brake to what I might do.
Their destination is Ganius, a tiny but permanent waterhole on a gravel plain beyond the dunes. The Bartletts come to stay for weeks or even months. Suri and a friend fly with them. Establishing camp 2 miles from the waterhole, Des and Jen will ferry back and forth to bring in vehicles and other supplies. Their expedition has all the logistic complexity of an airborne invasion. Months before, they had built a blind overlooking the waterhole. By now, the wildlife accepts it as part of the scenery. Generally, one of them will spend all day filming, while the other tends camp or stakes out another location. Long days alone with the desert wind are routine for them, and each day in the blind is a new experience. Far from boring, it is a delight for Jen and Des. A flock of ostrich come to water. These strange, flightless creatures may stand up to 8 feet tall and weigh 300 pounds or more. Ostriches like these wide-open spaces, where their keen eyes and 40-mile-an-hour running speed can save them from predators. Sand grouse arrive by the hundreds in wave after wave. They are vulnerable here, and their policy is to drink and run. A jackal waits for them. Out on the gravel plain, a strange, flightless grasshopper is almost invisible because of its artful camouflage. When alarmed, the huge insect makes such a loud, rasping noise, other creatures give it a wide berth. Some distance from the waterhole, Des spots an ostrich on a nest. Usually they nest out in the open in places like this, hiding in plain sight. Des and Jen land nearby where they have set up a portable hide. Every 2 or 3 days, they will edge the hide closer to the nest. Eventually, it will be only 30 yards from the nest and its defenders. Weeks later, some chicks have hatched. Jen sneaks closer to place a microphone near the nest. They want to record the sound of the chicks. Suri gets into the act. He would attack the chicks if he could. A war of nerves begins. Frustrated, Suri decides to dig. Suri is driven off, and the encounter ends in stalemate.
You're ready for okay.
At the Ganius camp, one of the rare visitors is Des and Jen's daughter, Julie.
Could you grab the other one, Julie?
She spent her early childhood in the field with her parents. When she was 12, she went away to school, but she hasn't forgotten how to be useful around camp.
That's it. Okay, she can go down. That's good. That's a relief.
During the night, an elephant has passed near the camp. They've never seen elephants here, and this one is headed north. Making a journey Des and Jen are eager to document. They'll try to track the elephant from the air. Julie follows on the ground with extra equipment and camping gear.
We hurriedly put things together and flew in the drifter and tracked one bull elephant from the Ganius waterhole. And you can stay with that elephant trail at 50 or 60 miles an hour without leaving a track yourself. And before too long, his single track led into a superhighway of elephant tracks.
The elephant has joined others on an established trail. It's easy to follow them for miles across the barren plain. They spot the herd, and now their years of patient aerial surveillance pay off. The elephants are used to the plain and carry on with their journey. For Des and Jen, it's the chance of a lifetime to observe and photograph the elephants where they've never seen them before. Flying ahead, Des and Jen rendezvous with Julie.
We're half a mile away, so if we hurry, we'll get them coming down the wash.
Let's go.
They'll set up their cameras to overlook the elephant's line of march.
Really? Thanks. Still no sign at the moment.
No.
Can you see this old track that the elephants have used for hundreds of years? They'll come right past here, just 30 yards from it.
That'll be so close.
Yeah. If we're lucky. It's 7 o'clock now, so they better be here. We lose the light entirely.
Yeah, it's going down.
Okay, we're lucky. Here they come out of that far wash. So.
Yeah, they're hurrying a bit too.
Yeah.
The herd appears. The elephants are moving fast, almost at a run, eager to reach water. The elephants are now almost 30 miles beyond the Ganias camp. They can only be headed for the Warusib River, about 5 miles away. They may not have been here for a year or more, but they seem to know exactly where they are going.
And they were really hurrying because they knew that water was only 5 miles away. And they disappeared down this wash towards the Warusib, the main river. And this wash had been covered by vast sand dunes. Obviously, it hadn't flown for many, many years. And now these sand dunes had moved over to the rocky mountain, you might say, on the right-hand side. And after they passed us, we decided to take a last flight to try and see them in the dunes. And it was very, very late.
Julie will wait for their return to show them where to land. In the failing light, Des and Jen cannot stay in the air very long. They're just in time to see the elephants reach the massive dunes and sweep over them.
Jen made 6 complete turns, revolutions, and I kept filming non-stop for that period. And the elephants would go up this steep sand embankment and then down, running down the slip face. And sometimes they'd split into 2 groups, thinking a different way was slightly better. But they'd all join up again and go on. And it was just an incredible experience, something no human eyes had ever seen before.
They catch a last dizzying glimpse of the elephants as fog drifts in from the coast and darkness descends on the desert.
Being so late in the day, we'd arranged for the forward lights to be turned on to give us guidance back to where we stopped. And we landed right at dusk, and it was a fantastic experience.
It's almost dark. They slip in and land just in time.
Most people use champagne to celebrate with, but we had no champagne, but we didn't need it. The experience was reward enough, and it was great.
It's a great moment for all of them. Today's flight has added only a little to our knowledge of the desert elephants. But for the Bartletts, years of patient effort are rewarded with the joy of accomplishment.
On them for 6 complete circles,
Wow.
and they'd split and they go down the dunes, and they're still as hurrying like they were when they came
Really?
past here.
Wow.
And it was good you turned the lights on when you did.
No, it's
I didn't
getting
need
so
the
dark.
sunglasses.
No.
We caught up with them in the wash where the dunes cut across, and they were just going up and over the dunes and single file and then splitting up into up slopes and down slip faces.
It's really a sight that no human eyes have ever seen before.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
We'll have to show you tomorrow where they went.
The following day, Des and Jen follow the elephant tracks into the Warusib riverbed beyond. Here, the herd rests. There is water in small pools and fresh vegetation to feed on. They will stay in this area for almost 2 months before moving on again, constantly solving the critical equation of food and water. Drought is the usual condition in the Namib Desert. When the miracle happens, rain is usually brief but violent. Swiftly the desert blooms. Long dormant seeds sprout and flowers appear. Withered plants spring to life, and an army of insects comes out of nowhere to feed on them. Cones form on a welwitschia plant. These bizarre dwarf trees can live for 2,000 years. Some were growing here when Christ was born. Fields of grass spread across the desert, and the wind blows the seeds and chaff far into the dunes. In the lee of each desert dune, this detritus swirls and gathers in a subtle dance, waves on an ocean of sand. One year, the Bartletts established a camp on a floodplain not far from the oasis where they filmed the elephants. This island of green, with its tiny airstrip, is a hidden paradise on the edge of the dunes.
We find it's fascinating in the desert, and the time factor changes. You know, the wet and the dry cycle is 10, 15, 20 years between one wet season and the next. And unless you're prepared to stay a long time, you won't ever gain that experience or know about it.
Now the elephants are so used to Des and Jen, they sometimes browse near camp. Poaching is not as bad as it was. Their numbers have increased, and they are not quite so skittish and shy of man. Ostrich chicks raised by Jen are imprinted on her. They consider her their mother and follow her everywhere around the camp. Suri still has to be kept away from them. As a special treat, Jen uproots grass for the little ostriches. They find succulent worms and grubs clinging to the roots. This green floodplain was created by the Namib River. Normally dry, it is sometimes fed by torrential rains far inland that race through the desert toward the sea. This only happens once every few years, and this instant river may exist for only a few hours or days. But now, with the help of the plains, Des and Jen can film the encroaching floodwaters as they overwhelm the desert sand. They can fly ahead and catch the instant of immersion. Most desert wildlife benefits enormously from this new source of water. But for some, it's a little too much too soon. Often, a river disappears into the sand without reaching the sea. But this time, the flood is powerful enough to break through the final barriers. For miles, the skeleton coast is transformed. A chocolate sea decorated with waves of white icing. From time to time, Des and Jen are joined in the desert by their daughter, Julie, her husband, Jim Bruton, and their son, Tarl.
What have you got, Tal?
For Tarl, born in the U.S., his grandfather and grandmother are figures of tremendous allure and fascination.
It's good to see you.
Hey, Jen. Good to see you again.
Very good.
You brought the good weather with you.
I know, it's
Nice.
beautiful.
On his mother's lap, Tarl will get his first ride in the plane to see the desert as his grandparents see it and meet some of its creatures for the first time. Jim, Julie, and Tarl want to stay on at the Skeleton Coast and help with the work that Des and Jen have begun.
See the seals?
Can you see them?
You see lots of seals?
Yeah, see them all running around out
With
there.
Julie, Jim and Tal, we're hoping that they'll be able to take over the filming and so on. They're very keen on the wildlife, and we're hoping that they can stay with us more and more and get more involved in every aspect of filmmaking. And Tal, from early age, has been fascinated by insects, and I hadn't realized young people could have this fascination with wildlife. Hopefully we can all work together, go back on some of the areas I've filmed many years before and see it as a family unit, that I can show the various habitats and wildlife to them and see it through their eyes as well.
The Bartletts, old and young, will remain here. They hope that the wildlife can be better protected in the future, so that lions will return to the beaches and elephants will be safe in the dunes. All could be survivors along this mysterious and beautiful Skeleton Coast.
We hope you have enjoyed this presentation from the National Geographic Video Library.
Where there's smoke, there's fire. And where there's a volcano, that's where you'll find Maurice and Katja Kraft. From Iceland to Hawaii, these death-defying scientists risk their lives in hot pursuit of active volcanoes. Their tools are cameras. Their mission is to capture nature's most powerful spectacle on film. Join National Geographic on this unforgettable journey to the edge of the volcano. Welcome to the Earth's watery kingdom. In these depths, there is only one ruler, and you are his guest. Join a feeding frenzy with a group of white-tipped gray sharks. Explore the ocean's sandy floor for prey with the hammerhead. Your host has many different faces, and you are privileged to witness behavior rarely captured on film. Dive into the unknown realm of our seas for extraordinary shark encounters.